Natalie Wood's death was first called a tragic accident, but over the years, many things about that night just didn't add up. Witnesses reported hearing screams for help coming from the water. Her husband's version of events kept changing. When investigators looked closer, they found bruises that didn't fit the official story. And deep in her past was a dark Hollywood secret that she never truly escaped. For more than 40 years, questions have lingered. Why was the investigation delayed? Why were powerful names protected? And why are people now saying that the truth is finally coming out, and that it's far more disturbing than anyone ever imagined? Natalie Wood was once known as the Golden Girl of Hollywood. She lit up red carpets with her charm and graced magazine covers with her beauty. Her acting talent and charisma won over audiences all around the world. But behind the perfect image of glamour and success, Natalie lived a life filled with fear, control, and sadness. When she died at the age of 43, the world mourned her loss, yet what truly shocked people was how many secrets surrounded her death. Why was Natalie so afraid of dark water? Why did she once confess to a friend that she feared her husband might harm her? And why, after so many years and endless rumors, has no one ever faced justice for what happened? Natalie Wood's life began far from the bright lights of fame. She was born on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, under the name Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko. Her parents, Maria and Nikolai, were Russian immigrants who had fled their country searching for a better future. But even in America, their family struggled to make ends meet. Her mother, Maria, became convinced that little Natalie was their only hope for success. She pushed her daughter into acting before she was even 5 years old. What began as small parts soon turned into a full-blown career in Hollywood. But the path was anything but gentle. Once, when Natalie couldn't cry on command during filming, her mother cruelly tore apart a butterfly in front of her to make her emotional. The child's tears worked for the scene, but the trauma stayed with her forever. It was one of the many ways that her career and her personal pain became inseparable. Despite these painful beginnings, Natalie's talent was undeniable. She wasn't just another cute child actor, she had a natural gift for expressing deep emotions that made audiences believe every word she said. Her big break came when she was just 8 years old in Miracle on 34th Street, where she played a little girl who didn't believe in Santa Claus. The film became a classic, and Natalie became a household name. People adored her innocent charm, but very few knew what her life was really like behind the scenes. She spent long days on film sets, often with little time for school or friends, constantly pushed to meet the demands of Hollywood. As she grew older, Natalie fought hard to move beyond the image of a child star. Her transformation into a serious actress came at 17 when she starred alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Her performance as Judy, a lonely, misunderstood teenager, was powerful enough to earn her an Oscar nomination. Overnight, Natalie Wood became one of Hollywood's most respected young stars. She continued to impress audiences with unforgettable roles in West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass, where she played women torn between love, heartbreak, and societal pressure. Her emotional honesty on screen made her relatable and adored by millions. Critics praised her depth, and directors loved her professionalism. To the world, she seemed to have everything: beauty, fame, talent, and success. And she had love, too, or so it seemed. Natalie's romance with actor Robert Wagner became one of Hollywood's most talked-about love stories. She had admired him since childhood and once told her mother she would marry him one day. That dream came true when they wed, becoming one of the industry's most glamorous couples. To outsiders, their relationship looked perfect, two stars deeply in love, living a fairy tale life. But as with so many Hollywood romances, the truth was far more complicated. Behind closed doors, Natalie's life was tightly controlled. As a child, her mother dictated everything she did. Later, the studios and her image as America's sweetheart kept her trapped in the public eye. Even after gaining independence as an adult, Natalie felt stuck between what people expected from her and what she truly wanted. She worked exhausting schedules, often shooting films back-to-back, with little time to rest. She wanted to grow as an artist, take on more challenging roles, and live a private life away from the spotlight, But those around her, including the people closest to her, rarely let her have that freedom. One of the most haunting things about Natalie's life was her paralyzing fear of dark water. This fear wasn't random, it stemmed from something her mother once told her. When Natalie was a child, a psychic had warned Maria that her daughter would die by drowning. That prediction stuck with Natalie all her life. She never enjoyed swimming, and she avoided deep or dark water whenever possible. Even so, fate placed her in terrifying situations she had always feared. Ironically and tragically, she would spend her last moments surrounded by the one thing she dreaded most. In November 1981, Natalie was on a yacht called Splendor with her husband Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the ship's captain. The trip was meant to be a relaxing weekend, but something went terribly wrong. Later that night, Natalie was found dead, floating in the cold water off California's Catalina Island. The official story said she had accidentally fallen from the boat while trying to tie down a dinghy. But from the beginning, details didn't make sense. Why had she gone out alone in the dark when she was terrified of water? Why did no one hear her fall? Witnesses nearby reported hearing a woman screaming for help, but her calls were ignored or dismissed. Even stranger, there were fresh bruises on her body that didn't match the accident explanation. Robert Wagner claimed he had no idea how she ended up in the water, but his version of events kept changing over the years. At first, he said she had gone to bed. Later, he said she had disappeared after an argument. The confusion only grew deeper as more witnesses came forward. The captain of the yacht later admitted that the couple had been fighting loudly before she vanished. He also claimed that Wagner delayed calling for help after realizing she was missing. Why the delay? No one could explain it. For decades, Natalie's death remained officially classified as an accident, but public pressure never stopped. In 2011, the case was reopened after new evidence surfaced. In 2022 and beyond, more testimonies and forensic reviews began to paint a different picture, one that hinted at foul play. By 2025, several insiders, former investigators, and close friends were speaking out again, suggesting that the truth was far darker than anyone had dared to say before. Natalie Wood's story is more than just a Hollywood mystery. It's a tragic tale of a woman who lived her entire life under control, first by her family, then by fame, and perhaps, finally, by fear. Her beauty and grace made her unforgettable, but her death remains one of Hollywood's most haunting unsolved stories. After 40 years, the world still wonders what really happened that night on the water, and whether the truth will ever fully come to light. It has taken more than 40 years, but the mystery surrounding Natalie Wood's death has been shaken once again. Recently, 2 new eyewitnesses have come forward with shocking information that could change everything we thought we knew. They claim they heard Natalie screaming for help and being attacked on the night she disappeared from the yacht Splendor. One of these witnesses is a man who was only 17 years old at the time. He had been working as a deckhand nearby, and for decades, his story was dismissed or ignored. Now, after all these years, he has decided to speak out. In his statement, he recalls hearing a loud, violent argument on board the yacht, followed by the sound of a woman crying out in fear. He said he heard her calling for help, things crashing, and then an eerie silence that sent chills down his spine. Supporting these claims is author and investigator Marty Rulli, who has spent years digging into the truth about Natalie Wood's final hours. Her upcoming book, Natalie Wood and the Devil She Knew, is already stirring serious debate among the public and within legal circles. Rulli believes the new evidence is strong enough to justify reopening the case and even calling for a grand jury investigation. That would mean witnesses could be questioned under oath and forced to tell the truth, something that surprisingly has never happened in this case. Perhaps the most chilling testimony comes from another longtime witness, Marilyn Wayne. She was on a nearby boat the night Natalie died and has always claimed that she heard a woman's desperate voice shouting, "Help me, someone please help me, I'm drowning." What makes her account even more unsettling is what she says Natalie once told her in confidence, "Wagner is going to kill me." If that statement is true, it means Natalie feared not just the water, but her own husband. One question continues to haunt everyone who has followed this case: how has Robert Wagner managed to remain a free man after all these years? Once one of Hollywood's most loved leading men, Wagner was officially named a person of interest by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in February 2018. Despite that, and despite increasing pressure from both the public and investigators, no charges have ever been brought against him. He has repeatedly refused to cooperate, avoiding interviews and declining to answer questions about what happened the night his wife died. It's difficult not to wonder, if this were anyone else, would they have been allowed to stay silent for so long? Investigators like Lieutenant John Carina have openly said that Wagner's version of events doesn't match what other witnesses reported. This inconsistency lies at the center of why so many people believe the case needs to be reopened. Then there's the question of the delayed search and rescue. On the night Natalie vanished, the Coast Guard wasn't alerted until around 3:30 a.m., more than 4 hours after she was last seen alive. Roger Smith, the captain of the rescue boat that eventually found her body, later admitted that he wasn't even called until after 5 a.m., nearly 6 hours after she went missing. In drowning cases, every minute counts. Why was there such a long delay, and who decided to wait before calling for help? Those lost hours could have been the difference between life and death. Adding even more suspicion are the results from Natalie's autopsy. Her blood alcohol level was found to be 0.14%, and she also had traces of medication for motion sickness and pain in her system. These substances could have affected her balance and made it harder for her to survive in the water. But more troubling were the bruises discovered on her arms, legs, and face, marks that didn't fit the explanation of a simple accidental fall. In 2012, the Los Angeles Coroner's Office updated her death certificate, changing the cause from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, acknowledging the possibility that something more sinister may have happened. To understand why this tragedy feels so personal to so many, it's important to look at Natalie and Robert Wagner's complicated history. Natalie first noticed Wagner when she was just 10 years old. She pointed at his photo and told her mother she would marry him one day. It seemed like a child's fantasy, but by the time she was 18, she was dating him. They married on December 28, 1957, in a glamorous ceremony that made headlines across America. They were seen as the picture-perfect couple, young, beautiful, talented, and completely in love. But the truth was far different from what fans saw in magazines. Behind closed doors, their marriage was filled with tension, jealousy, and control. Wagner was a respected actor, but he couldn't match Natalie's fame. By the early 1960s, she was the bigger star, with Oscar nominations and leading roles in major films, while he was still trying to find steady success. That imbalance caused problems between them. Friends said Wagner grew possessive, often watching Natalie closely and resenting her co-stars. Rumors spread that he was jealous of her success and the attention she received from other men. The most explosive story, though, came from whispers inside Hollywood that Natalie had caught Wagner in an intimate situation with another man shortly before their first divorce. In the conservative world of 1962, that would have been a huge scandal. Whether or not that story was fully true, what we do know is that the couple separated in June 1961 and divorced officially in April 1962. After the breakup, Natalie's love life remained rocky. She had a passionate and sometimes volatile relationship with actor Warren Beatty, filled with jealousy and fiery arguments. Later, she married British film producer Richard Gregson. They had a daughter, Natasha, in 1970, but the marriage fell apart after Natalie discovered Gregson was cheating on her with her own secretary. Heartbroken again, Natalie was left wondering if she would ever find real happiness. Then, almost 10 years after their divorce, she reconnected with Robert Wagner. By that time, both of them were single again. Wagner had divorced actress Marion Marshall, and Natalie had left Gregson. Their reunion in 1972 surprised everyone. Friends were stunned by how quickly they fell back in love. Some believed Natalie still cared deeply for him and saw him as the only man who truly understood her life in Hollywood. Others thought she went back to him out of exhaustion and loneliness, drawn to something familiar even if it wasn't healthy. Their second wedding was small and private, held on a yacht off the coast of Malibu on July 16, 1972. It was a quiet contrast to their first, glittering Hollywood ceremony. But to those who knew Natalie, the choice of location, the ocean, felt eerie. This was the same ocean she had feared since childhood, the same dark water a psychic had once told her would claim her life. To outsiders, it looked like a romantic new beginning. To some close friends, it felt like a dangerous mistake. The couple's marriage continued to be complicated. Though they appeared happy in public, people close to them said the relationship still had undercurrents of tension and control. Natalie was now a mother and an experienced actress who wanted more creative freedom, while Wagner remained protective, sometimes overly so. Their last trip together, the ill-fated weekend on the Splendor, was supposed to be a relaxing getaway with actor Christopher Walken. Instead, it became one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries. After decades of rumors, new evidence, and witness accounts, the truth about what really happened that night remains uncertain. But with the recent testimonies, calls for justice are louder than ever. Many believe the case should be reopened and that, after 40 years of silence, Natalie may finally get the justice she deserves. They blended their families after remarrying. Wagner became a stepfather to Natalie's daughter, Natasha, and in 1974, they welcomed a baby girl together named Courtney. For a short time, it seemed as if they had finally found the peace and happiness they had both been searching for. But people close to them started to notice that the same problems that ruined their first marriage were returning. Friends and witnesses who saw Natalie and Wagner together during their second marriage described their relationship as tense and controlling. Many said Wagner's possessiveness came back stronger than ever, especially when it came to Natalie's work. Natalie still wanted to act, to take on difficult roles, and to grow as an artist. But Wagner, according to reports, wanted her to slow down and focus more on her family. He was said to be uncomfortable with her close friendships and her working relationships with male co-stars. Some friends claimed their fights could get heated and emotional, though outsiders could never tell just how serious those arguments really were. One of the most emotional parts of this story comes from Natalie's oldest daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner. In recent years, she has worked hard to keep her mother's memory alive. She produced an HBO documentary called Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, where she spoke honestly about her childhood and her relationship with Robert Wagner. Natasha remembered Wagner as a kind, caring, and loving stepfather, someone who was there for her after her biological father left. She said he helped raise her and supported her through the most painful parts of her life. But even Natasha admitted she struggles with conflicting feelings. She loves the man who raised her, yet she cannot ignore the accusations that link him to her mother's mysterious death. This contradiction is one of the hardest parts of the case to understand. How can one person be seen as both a devoted father figure and a possible suspect in one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries? Relationship experts and psychologists have said that in many cases of controlling or toxic relationships, the warning signs aren't always clear to those on the inside. What might seem normal to the people involved can look deeply troubling to outsiders. Sometimes, the person being hurt still wants to believe that love can fix everything. Natalie may have hoped that her second marriage to Wagner would be different, that this time, they could find stability and peace together. But this raises a haunting question: was Natalie's second marriage a true second chance, or was it a dangerous return to a toxic and possibly abusive relationship? This question matters because it changes how we understand what happened on that final, tragic night. If her marriage was truly happy, her death might have been a heartbreaking accident. But if it was filled with jealousy, fear, and control, then everything that happened on the yacht takes on a darker, more frightening meaning. November 27, 1981, began as a weekend getaway that was supposed to be relaxing. Natalie, her husband Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, set sail on the Splendor, a beautiful boat anchored near Catalina Island off the California coast. It should have been a peaceful trip, but by the end of that weekend, Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, would be gone forever. Her death would go on to become one of the most puzzling and heartbreaking mysteries in Hollywood history. The group's trip to Catalina started as a short break from filming Brainstorm, the movie Natalie and Walken were working on together. But from the very start, there were signs of tension. The weather was rough, with cold wind and choppy water making the yacht rock uncomfortably. Wagner decided to move the Splendor to a quieter and more private area called Two Harbors. But that privacy, instead of bringing peace, only made things worse. That evening, the four of them went ashore for dinner at a well-known restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef. People who worked there and other diners later recalled that the group drank heavily throughout the night. Wine, champagne, and cocktails flowed freely. By the time they left, they were clearly drunk. Several witnesses remembered Wagner and Walken arguing at the table, and the disagreement seemed to center on Natalie's career. Walken, who admired Natalie as an actress, reportedly told her to keep working and not let anything hold her back. Wagner, on the other hand, was said to be irritated by Walken's comments and wanted Natalie to focus more on their marriage and family life. The argument didn't stop there. When they returned to the yacht, the tension only grew worse. Captain Dennis Davern would later tell police and journalists that the atmosphere on the boat that night was thick with anger. Wagner and Walken kept arguing, and Wagner seemed increasingly jealous, believing that Walken might be too close to his wife. Wagner later admitted that he became so angry he grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it on the table. But what happened after that moment remains unclear, and it is the heart of the mystery. Wagner said that after the argument, Natalie went to bed early. When he checked on her later, she was gone. That's the official story. But Davern has long claimed that's not what really happened. According to him, Wagner knew Natalie was missing much earlier but did nothing about it. Davern said Wagner told him not to turn on the searchlights, not to call out for her, and not to contact the Coast Guard right away. Hours passed before anyone made the call for help. This delay would prove to be one of the most suspicious details of the entire case. In cold ocean water, a person's survival time is often only minutes. Every second counts. Yet there was a gap of more than 4 hours between the time Natalie was last seen and the time help was finally called. Why was so much time wasted? And who made that decision? Meanwhile, on another boat anchored nearby, a couple named John Payne and Marilyn Wayne were spending the night. They later said they heard a woman screaming for help, desperate, terrified cries that went on for several minutes. The voice was pleading, "Someone help me, I'm drowning." But then, the screams suddenly stopped. They thought it was strange that no one seemed to be searching the water, and the next morning, they learned that Natalie had died. When Natalie's body was found floating face down near the shore, she was wearing a flannel nightgown, socks, and a red down jacket. It was a heartbreaking image, and one that made no sense to those who knew her. Natalie had always been terrified of dark water. Friends said she never would have gone out alone at night, especially not in rough seas. So how did she end up there? The official cause of death was ruled an accidental drowning, but from the very beginning, that explanation didn't sit right with many people, not with the witnesses, not with the investigators who revisited the case years later, and not with the fans who had followed Natalie's life and career. The bruises on her body, the broken bottle, the delay in calling for help, all of it suggested that something more had happened that night. To this day, the truth remains buried beneath decades of secrecy, silence, and pain. But new witnesses and evidence continue to come forward, challenging the version of events that Hollywood accepted for so long. Natalie Wood's story is not just about a mysterious death, it's about a woman who lived a life of beauty, talent, fear, and control, and whose final moments remain one of the most haunting questions in film history. Was it truly an accident, or was there something far more tragic beneath the surface? After all these years, the world is still waiting for answers. Around midnight, Marilyn heard something that still haunts her to this day, a woman's voice crying out from the dark water. The voice sounded desperate, repeating over and over again, "Help me, someone please help me, I'm drowning." Frightened, she woke her partner, John, and together they listened, trying to figure out where the cries were coming from. Then, they heard a man's calm, dismissive voice reply, "Okay, honey." A few seconds later, the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was chilling. Marilyn was so disturbed that the next morning she tried to report what she'd heard, but she was never asked to testify. Many have since wondered why such an important eyewitness report was ignored. By the time the Coast Guard was finally called, around 3:30 a.m., it was already too late. Several hours later, Natalie Wood's body was found floating face down in the water about a mile from the yacht. She was wearing a flannel nightgown, a red down jacket, and socks. Nearby, her small dinghy, the boat tied to the Splendor, was discovered beached on shore. Early reports suggested she had tried to secure the dinghy, accidentally fallen into the water, and drowned. But that story didn't make sense. Natalie had been terrified of dark water her whole life. Her friends and family said she never would have gone out alone at night, especially in rough weather. To make things even stranger, the ropes tying the dinghy were still securely fastened, meaning it hadn't been untied at all. The autopsy report only deepened the mystery. Natalie's blood alcohol level was 0.14%, nearly twice the legal limit for driving. She also had motion sickness pills and painkillers in her system, which likely made her more disoriented. But what caught investigators' attention were the bruises found on her arms, legs, and face, and a scrape on her left cheek. Experts have debated for decades whether those injuries came from a fall into the water or if they were the result of a struggle before she went overboard. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the original coroner, ruled her death an accidental drowning, but even he later admitted that there were unanswered questions. In 2012, the coroner's office officially changed the cause of death to drowning and other undetermined factors, suggesting that something more complicated, and possibly violent, may have occurred. One of the most suspicious parts of the case is the delay in reporting Natalie missing. According to maritime law, the captain of a boat is responsible for the safety of everyone on board. Yet Captain Dennis Davern has repeatedly said that Robert Wagner stopped him from taking immediate action. Davern claimed Wagner told him everything was fine and insisted they wait before contacting authorities. Wagner, however, has always denied this, saying he was in shock and that the tragedy was simply an accident. Critics have long argued that those lost hours may have cost Natalie her life, and conveniently gave everyone aboard time to come up with a consistent story before help arrived. There's also confusion about the last time Natalie was seen alive. Wagner's own accounts have changed over the years. Sometimes he said she went to bed early, other times that she stepped out to the deck. Christopher Walken, her co-star who was also on the yacht, has mostly stayed quiet about that night. In one rare interview, he suggested that Natalie might have gone out to adjust the dinghy because it was making noise against the yacht. But that theory makes little sense. Why would a woman so afraid of water, especially at night and after drinking so much, decide to handle the dinghy in stormy conditions? Investigators and the public have never found that explanation believable. The speed at which the case was closed also raised suspicions. Within just a few days, authorities declared Natalie Wood's death a tragic accident and closed the investigation. But as more details came out, it became obvious that the official story didn't hold up. Many witnesses were never properly interviewed. Some testimonies were ignored altogether. And the people closest to Natalie, including those on the yacht, were allowed to go home without facing deep questioning. This left behind a long list of unanswered questions. What exactly happened between the time the group returned from dinner and the time Natalie vanished? Who saw her last? Why were screams heard from the water but never reported by anyone on board? And how could a night that was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway turn into one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries? Even after decades, the truth about that night remains buried under secrecy, conflicting stories, and pain. The story takes an even darker turn when we look at what Natalie endured earlier in her life, secrets she carried until her death. In 2021, Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, published a book titled Little Sister, My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Natalie Wood. In it, she made a shocking revelation. Natalie had confided in her that she was assaulted by one of Hollywood's most powerful men, actor Kirk Douglas. To understand this part of Natalie's story, we have to go back to the 1950s. Natalie was just 16 years old, a young rising star being closely managed, and many say controlled, by her ambitious mother, Maria. Maria was determined to make her daughter a major movie star and believed that powerful connections were the key. According to Lana, Maria arranged for Natalie to meet Kirk Douglas, who was one of the most influential actors in Hollywood at the time. Douglas was known for his charm, fame, and authority in the industry. To Maria, introducing her daughter to him seemed like a golden opportunity, a chance to open doors for Natalie's future. But what happened that night was not a career opportunity at all. According to Lana's book, Natalie came home deeply shaken and visibly distressed. Her clothes were messy, her face pale, and her voice trembling. She pulled her little sister aside and whispered the horrifying words, "He hurt me, Lana." Natalie didn't go into full detail, but it was clear that she had been assaulted. That night marked the beginning of a secret she carried for the rest of her life, one that filled her with shame, confusion, and fear. For years, Natalie never spoke publicly about what happened. She buried that trauma and focused on her work, building an image of confidence and grace. But deep down, those scars never healed. Lana said that as they grew older, she saw how the memory of that night continued to haunt her sister. Even at the height of fame, Natalie remained vulnerable and anxious, often drawn to men who were controlling or emotionally unpredictable, perhaps reflecting the damage done to her at such a young age. This revelation changed the way people understood Natalie Wood's life. It exposed the darker side of the Hollywood system in which she had grown up, a time when young actresses were often treated as tools for power and success, their safety and dignity ignored. It wasn't unusual for powerful men to take advantage of vulnerable young women in exchange for promises of fame or opportunity. In that environment, Natalie's story was sadly not unique, but it was one of the most tragic. Even decades later, Lana's claims continue to spark debate. Some question her motives or memory, while others believe her account completely fits the pattern of abuse that was rampant in old Hollywood. What most agree on, though, is that Natalie's life was shaped not only by fame, beauty, and success, but also by fear, manipulation, and pain. In many ways, the mystery surrounding Natalie Wood's death mirrors the struggles she faced throughout her life, the silence, the power imbalance, and the fear of speaking the truth. Whether on the yacht that night or in her early years as a young actress, Natalie's voice was too often ignored. And maybe that's the saddest part of all, that even in her final moments, her cries for help went unanswered. It also forces us to ask difficult questions about how the trauma Natalie experienced early in life may have affected her choices later on, the relationships she entered, the people she trusted, and even the fears she carried until the end. Many wonder why she never went public about what happened to her. The truth is, in the 1950s and 1960s, the Hollywood system was built to protect powerful men at all costs. Studio executives, publicists, and lawyers worked tirelessly to hide scandals and preserve reputations. A young actress who dared to speak up risked everything: her career, her safety, and her future. Women who spoke out were often labeled as difficult or troublemakers, and once that label stuck, work became impossible to find. That culture of silence didn't just protect one man like Kirk Douglas, it protected an entire system. Directors, producers, and agents all operated under unspoken rules that valued fame and profit over the well-being of the women who made their movies successful. Justice rarely came for those who were hurt, and most victims were left to suffer quietly, afraid of losing everything they had worked for. For Natalie, those early experiences of betrayal and violation may have shaped how she saw the world. They likely influenced how she understood love, power, and safety. Someone who has been deeply hurt learns early that trust can be dangerous. That fear of being controlled or harmed again can make even strong, successful people more vulnerable to toxic relationships. When we look at Natalie's life, we can see how these emotional scars may have affected her personal relationships, especially her marriage to Robert Wagner. Their relationship was full of love and passion, but also jealousy and tension. Those who knew them well described a pattern where Wagner's possessiveness often clashed with Natalie's need for independence. For a woman who had spent her entire life being controlled, first by her mother, then by Hollywood, that kind of relationship would have been both comforting and frightening. She wanted love, but she also wanted freedom, and those two things rarely existed together in her world. Psychologists who study trauma say that early abuse can create a repeating cycle in a person's life. The mind seeks familiar patterns, even if those patterns are painful. In Natalie's case, her longing for stability and affection may have drawn her toward relationships that mirrored her childhood experiences, ones where power was uneven and her emotions were pushed aside. She may have learned to please others, to stay quiet, to endure discomfort rather than risk confrontation. This pattern is heartbreaking, especially when viewed alongside the mystery of her death. The very fears and insecurities that haunted her could have influenced the choices she made that final night on the Splendor. Perhaps she stayed quiet during arguments. Perhaps she believed things would calm down. Or perhaps, after years of burying pain, she no longer believed that speaking up would change anything. Natalie's story is not just about a Hollywood tragedy or an unsolved mystery. It's also about a woman who spent her life trying to balance who she really was with what the world expected her to be. On screen, she was confident, radiant, and adored by millions. Off-screen, she was still that young girl searching for safety and peace in an industry, in a world, that often denied her both. Her fear of dark water, the prophecy that haunted her, the controlling forces around her, and the trauma she endured all paint a picture of someone who carried invisible burdens. Even as she smiled for cameras and won awards, she was fighting silent battles most never saw. When you consider everything she lived through, the manipulation, the exploitation, and the constant pressure, it's not surprising that her final years were filled with unease. In the end, Natalie Wood's story forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about Hollywood's past, and about the way society treats women who speak up. For too long, people chose to look away from the darker side of fame. Her death may have been labeled an accident, but the secrecy, inconsistencies, and decades of silence suggest something much more complex. Whether or not we ever learn exactly what happened that night, the real tragedy is that Natalie's voice, both in life and death, was not fully heard. And maybe that's what makes her story so haunting. Natalie Wood's legacy is not only about the films she made or the beauty she represented. It's about the price she paid for success in a world that didn't protect her. It's about the countless women whose stories were buried under the same silence that surrounded hers. And it's about the hope that by remembering her truth, we finally learn to listen. Thank you for watching. If you found this story moving, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most mysterious and untold stories. Click the next video to discover more secrets behind the stars, and the truths that were never meant to be revealed.